Hello, judges and esteemed members of the jury. My name is TB Skine, and we're going to be following on from yesterday with part 2 of Confessions of a Broken Blade. Now, these are not going to be the only videos I'm doing while this story is being released. I'm going to try to do some other videos to kind of put up in between as well, so it's not just all League of Legends stuff, but this is probably going to be something I'm concerning myself quite a bit with, because like I said last time, I'm very happy that Riot is doing this. I'm very happy that we have some ongoing episodic lore to follow now, something that can actually kind of start to build a universe that will follow up on some of the many plot threads that Riot has left dangling for a long time. Before we get into it, though, a little note on what these videos are. These videos are essentially live editing and critiquing sessions by me of the writing. And what that means is that the criticisms I bring up here aren't like objective, checked off, checked with math, sort of based on writing science mistakes that must be fixed, otherwise the writing is wrong or bad. What I bring up here is my personal preferences, my personal experiences, my personal knowledge of how best to, phrase a certain thing or establish a certain concept or do things in storytelling. I'm not perfect. Like, I'm not the world's greatest writer, or else I probably wouldn't have a YouTube channel doing videos. I would probably be off writing somewhere. I'm just someone who has some opinions and some experience and hopefully some useful feedback to offer. So this should really not be taken as some kind of objective, this is wrong, I'm checking it off, like going through with the red pen and grading stuff, even though I do use grades in my title, because that's an easy shorthand to... Anyway, but just want to keep that in mind, because on the last video there were a few comments of people kind of... It felt a little bit like they thought what I was trying to say was that I was right and Riot was wrong, and my way of writing is superior and theirs was stupid, and that's really not what's going on. So, Confessions of a Broken Blade Part 2. If you want to read the story or read through it, there's going to be links down in the description to the story itself, so you can go and read it, which you should. Or there's a link to the YouTuber Necrit, who's doing live readings or dramatic readings of all of the stories as they're released in turn. He's working with Riot on this, so it's like an officially sanctioned audiobook, essentially. So you can go and listen to that if you'd like something to read along with, or just, use it to play in your headset while you're out for a walk or something. So, the first thing I want to talk about is something I didn't really talk about for the previous video, and that is the picture at the top of the chapter. I wasn't sure if that was going to be a one-off or if they were going to keep doing it, but it looks like they're going to do one for every chapter, and I just want to say that that's a brilliant idea. That's a great idea, because one of the oldest maxims in storytelling is that a picture is worth 1,000 words. And this is true. And I'm not saying that just because I'm primarily a visual artist. It really is true. It's a hell of a lot easier if you want to establish what a location looks like, what a character looks like. It's a hell of a lot easier to put a picture of them up than to try and use, 14 paragraphs to describe quite how they look or how they feel or what it's like being there. If you have a picture that can communicate all of that, you can save a lot of space, and you can give your audience like a visual model for how to imagine your world. Some authors prefer not to, of course, because sometimes part of the pleasure for the audience is to imagine their own visuals for the world, but League of Legends is a world that already has a hell of a lot of visuals pre-established for it, so like, the audience doesn't... I think it's better, on the whole, to give the audience images to help them imagine. And what images they are giving us. This right here is, well, first of all, Yasuo is hanging out in the background right over here on the right, which is a little bit weird because this is a courthouse, and he's a wanted criminal. And I can't help but be like, guys, there's like a wanted murderer. It's like literally right there. He's not even disguised or anything, and he's wearing like a pretty distinctive outfit. I feel like it would be hard to mistake Yasuo for anyone else. Like, there's a judge right here, murderer over there. Maybe someone wants to do something about it. But of course, the image should probably not be taken too literally, because this is hagiography. Now, hagiography is an old discipline that is essentially it's within the Catholic faith. Hagiography is the discipline of writing stories about the lives of saints. And that discipline includes visual representations of the saints. This is where you get all those Catholic icons from churches and stuff, where you see the saints in various situations, performing their miracles, usually with halos behind their heads or images of Christ or the Madonna and so on and so forth. This takes some pretty blatant inspiration from that. Riven is literally framed with a cyan halo and her sword as well, which marks her out as special amongst the crowd, which is also something that's accomplished just with the light. You can see that Riven is curiously both lit up and in shadow, and you can see that the audience that looks at her, the magistrates and the judges who are observing her, yeah, they could be lit by the light coming from the window, but it's also almost like they're being lit up by her. She's enlightening them, or in another way of saying it, she's passing information onto them. She's telling them. It's in terms of a visual mimicry of that style of painting, like the sort of quasi-Renaissance saintly hagiography, this is really freaking good. I really, really like this. Just the use of color. Look at the little rainbow specks on the floor, and like the ways that the windows and the background is just, it's gorgeous. I love it. But that's not really what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about the writing. So I've gotten a hold of a little plugin for my browser so I can highlight some things, which will make it easier for me to go through this and actually talk about what I want to talk about. And one of the things I want to talk about is adverbs. Now, adverbs are those words that end in ly, generally. When something, it's greatly or badly or poorly or funnily enough or, indeed, thickly. Adverbs are something I think you have to be very careful with, because an adverb is often used as a method of telling rather than showing. And I think there was an example somewhere here. That was, yeah, here's a great example. During the trial, some of the Ionians get angry and throw rotten fruit at Riven. A moldy egg fruit sailed through the air and pelted Riven in the neck. The fermented juice and pulp slid wetly down the back of her shirt. The rotten smell rose up in the air, but Riven would not allow the scent of death to take her back to that moment long ago. So, think about that. Someone throws a moldy egg fruit that hits her, and then there's fermented juice and pulp that slides down her neck. But the description that's chosen is it slides wetly down her neck. How else would it slide down her neck? It is juice and pulp from a rotten fruit. So if it hits you, it's not gonna be dry. It's wetly. Like, of course it's wet. And that's the danger with adverbs, is when you feel the need to describe the manner in which an action happens, that can be easily inferred from what else is going on. And this is something I bring up, first of all, because adverbs are, you really have to be careful about using them. For example, it was a question that had plagued Riven. Why had she been spared when others had not? She could offer no answer that would satisfy. It seems I did not, she said, quietly. Here, I feel like, okay, she's kind of, you could show that she says it quietly rather than state that she says it quietly, that she looks down at the floor and mumbles, it seems I did not. Or you can hear immediately and follow up, indeed, the judge smiled coldly. And coldly is something that shows up rather often in this, it shows up more than once in this story. And it's something that shows up rather often in writing. People say that someone, when they want to impart to the reader that someone is hostile towards someone else, that says they do things coldly. They look at them coldly. They smile coldly. They speak coldly. And that's something where I really feel coldly staring the congregation into silence. That's not a different action than staring the congregation into silence. The passive aggressiveness here is established already. This is after the farmer that Riven has been living with has been allowed to speak. The judge has had to shut the room up so that he would be able to talk at all, and is quite annoyed that people aren't respecting the judicial process. This is already established. So, thank you, Master Conti, for sharing your knowledge with the council, the judge said, staring the congregation into silence. Your attestation is finished. Coldly doesn't add anything. It doesn't tell me anything substantially new about the manner in which the character is speaking. And this is the danger of adverbs, is that they tend to lend themselves very well to over-explanation. The warrior priest shifted uncomfortably. For me, that would be more interesting to say the warrior priest shifted on his feet back and forth, unable to rest. Like, there are better ways to describe what he's doing rather than just say what he is doing. A young temple adept swayed nervously before the council hall. A young temple adept swayed before the council hall, his eyes darting back and forth. With that, I have shown that he is nervous without stating that he's nervous. And for me, I'm a very visual reader in the sense that when I read, images pop into my head. Like in a very literal sense, I imagine things visually. And for me, it's much more interesting to describe what's going on rather than just to state he's nervous. It's more interesting to say he's jumping back and forth and seems unable to stand still. So I can go, oh, he's nervous. That's what he's behaving like, he's nervous. Let me figure out how the character is feeling by telling me what they're doing. And again, this is just a personal little pet peeve of mine, that adverbs are something that whenever they show up too much and I start to notice them, they bother me. And in a lot of writing, it can usually, for me, it makes for much more dynamic writing if you, instead of just stating what happens, show what happens, describe it what happens. So, a couple of other things. In the previous video, I mentioned at length that I was a little bit annoyed that the first chapter spends a lot of time world building, diving into Riven's psyche, like explaining her state of mind, trying to sort of get into the character and setting up the backstory of Noxus and Ionia and all that stuff, because the first chapter is our first impression. And for me, that's where the action needs to kick off. Like, that's where you need to capture our interest. That's where you need to show, these are the stakes, these are the characters, here's what's going on. That's why, for instance, Star Wars doesn't... It begins with, like, the opening crawl, but the first action you see on the screen is boom, 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 space action, a ship being chased down, like, fighting in the hallways, in the corridors, and Darth Vader walks in, and droids escape to the planet. Like, you start in the action immediately because you want to capture the attention. Imagine instead if Star Wars had started with, instead of the opening crawl, we had like 10 minutes of scenes of characters just kind of talking about, oh, it's so terrible living under the Galactic Empire. Well, yes, but we can't defeat the Galactic Empire because they have the evil Lord Darth Vader. Oh, yes, I've heard that he's chasing the princess down in outer space. Like, a whole bunch of scenes kind of setting up the world. And then after 20 minutes of film, you finally get to some actual action. That would be a really weak start, because what you want is to show that Darth Vader is dangerous as fuck by having him stride in over the corpses of his enemies and threaten the princess of a sovereign nation to reveal the location of the rebel base and so forth. Show is better than tell, and adverbs lend themselves very well to telling. I got back to adverbs somehow. That was not really what I wanted to talk about. In the last one I talked about, they spent too much time on world building in the first chapter, and I feel like that world building would have been really well suited for the second chapter for one simple reason. In the first chapter, Riven is captured, taken into custody, and thrown in prison. What we get here is we open up on the action. Like, we do exactly the thing I wanted to have happen in the first one. We open immediately on the action, and I feel like Riven being thrown into a prison, about to be judged by her, by the people who she fought in the war, that is a prime opportunity to dive into her mind. What's she thinking while she's in that cell? What's her mind like? Where does it drift? Where does she try to not make it drift? Like, does she repeat that mantra that she had in the previous chapter, like trying to learn the language of family in Ionia, which was really freaking important to her, to know how to speak the words that are associated with family, because this new family that she has found is like the only hope and kindness she has left in the world. A rough sleep in a stone cell while awaiting what she thinks is going to be her execution. That's the point where I would have shoved all of that shit in. That's what I would have really reveled in her mind. And really sort of, you could have gotten all kinds of stuff done by showing half-formed flashbacks as Riven's mind keeps jumping back to the war and she keeps wrestling herself forward because she doesn't want to think about it. That's when you really have an opportunity to do that stuff. But instead, in the first chapter of the story, we spend a hell of a lot of time just kind of with her standing around in a field and nothing happening, because we're stuck in world-building mode. So there's that. Secondly, characterization. Characterization can take many forms. One of my favorite forms of characterization is language, in the sense that characterizing characters by the way that they speak. And this is something that kind of comes up a little bit here. There's a few things going on with the language here. First of all, I know you are not of this land. The dialect here is tricky. I will speak the common tongue so that we may better understand each other. This is the judge speaking to Riven. Speaking in this very sort of stilted, very formal tone. That works really well. Like, the judge would be someone, like, they're an official position, they are emissary, like, they're agents of the law, they keep a high office, they're probably highly educated. Of course, they would have a rather formal dialect. But let's see if we can find, there was the farmer. Yeah. Here we have the farmer, Asa, her surrogate father, essentially, talking about how they found Riven. It was the start of the wet season, Asa continued. She was soaked to the bone, nothing but fevered bones held together by mud and stubborn Noxian muscle. She carried a weapon, a blade. The scabbard was inscribed with the marks of their father tongue. No Ionian would carry such a weapon. My sons, my boys, their bones have long since been cleaned by the sky. Would those we lost wish us to bury ourselves in grief beside them? This is a farmer. Probably a rather poor farmer, by the way they've so far been described. This is a farmer dude who lives on a farm and farms things in the farm field. He's a farmer. Why does the farmer speak in language that is, if anything, more poetic than the learned judge sitting in judgment? Why does that happen? Is that just how all Ionians speak all of the time, always? That doesn't make any sense, because one of the points that's brought up in the story is that Ionian dialects are tricky. Like, they have all completely different accents from place to place that can be really hard for a speaker to learn. That's why Riven is having so much trouble learning the language, is because the dialect is tricky to her. It's very different. It's very strange. So clearly Ionians don't all speak the same, so why does a farmer speak in the same very heightened, very poetic language as a judge? To which you might say, oh, well, that's because he's in a courthouse. Of course he's going to talk like that. But that, to me, is kind of... Sure, you can justify it like that, but to me, that's a wasted opportunity for characterization. To tell us something about who this farmer is by the way that he talks. Like, maybe he uses farming metaphors. Maybe he talks in similes and contractions and things that make sense for him as a person of the land, whereas the judge has this heightened formal language. Like, that's an opportunity to distinguish these characters, to show who this person is in a much more understandable sense than having to explain to us, or having us sit there and go, well, maybe it's because he's in a courthouse, because that's never stated in the story. Like, there's no point in the story where it's like Riven could tell that he was putting on his best speaking voice and trying to talk in a more fancy way. None of that is there. So I kind of have to sit here and make excuses for the story to explain why a farmer and a judge talk the same way. And even Riven, Riven herself talks, Noxus is no longer what it once was. That would imply I wish to return. No contractions, no colloquial language. She's a soldier from Noxus who was born on a farm in, fuck off everywhere. Like, she's not noble. She's a soldier who was born on a farm, who was sent over and used as cannon fodder to die in the war. That's who Riven is. But her language, too, is really formal. And here, again, there's an opportunity lost, because on the one hand, yes, you could have her speak in more rough language, but the other thing you could do is make it clear that Riven only knows how to speak Ionian that way. Like, the only way she knows how to speak Ionian is this very formal, very structured, non-colloquial verbiage. Like, because she has only learned a formal version of Ionian. She hasn't learned a lived version of Ionian. It's the difference between someone who learns to speak perfect English from an English class and someone who's actually from Liverpool, right? That kind of thing. And again, I kept being a little frustrated by it, that the language was not being used more actively to distinguish the characters from each other. But something that was really brilliant, that was really cleverly done, was, you have been brought before this council, the judge interrupted, drawing Riven's attention back to the three robed figures and the crowd gathered within the hall, because we wish to know what you have to say. Am I not being sentenced? The judge swallowed her surprise. I'm unclear about how justice is carried out where you come from, but here we believe justice is first served by understanding enlightenment. The judge spoke to Riven as if she was a young child. We believe you have the knowledge of an event that is most important to this community. If that knowledge reveals a crime, then you could be sentenced and punished accordingly. This is really clever. Like, because this is... Riven assumes that they're about to kill her. Like, just straight up kill her. She does not assume that there will be a trial. She does not assume that there will be a jury or a hearing or any kind of justice. She assumes the moment she is captured, she's dead. Because that's how it is in Noxus. And this is a brilliant bit of world building. This is what I love. When a character has this baseline assumption from their own culture that they just go around expecting everywhere else to be the same way because they haven't known anything else. And the conflict between that and the standards of the society they're actually in reveals something about both societies. It tells us something about what it's like in Noxus, and it tells us a hell of a lot about what it's like in Ionia and why these nations are different, why they might have been at war. They have this massive ideological difference that comes across brilliantly in this little exchange, where Riven assumes she's going to be sentenced. And then, Riven looked from the judge to Asa, then back. Justice in Noxus was often decided in combat. If one was lucky, it was decided swiftly and with the sharpened end of the weapon. And that's where I get a little annoyed, because they did this great thing, this brilliant, clever thing, where you world build both things without going into an explanation, and then immediately after they do the clever thing, they explain the thing back to me. I had already figured this out. I already got this. And now you're here sort of spelling it out. It's like explaining the joke, right? It's a lot less brilliant if you don't have the confidence to just let it sit there. That being said, there is one thing about this. This lore that Riot puts out, it's, first of all, it's really... Part of the reason why they're so slow to do it is that they want to translate it to as many languages as possible before they release it, and that takes a lot of time. Translation is a slow, difficult discipline. The second thing is, it has to be appropriate for readers of all levels. I'm 29, I've been reading for most of my life. I read a lot of rather difficult literature, not all of it for fun, but I'm used to reading at a relatively high level. But what if you're 14 and really into League of Legends? Then you might not have caught this the same way I did, and you might not have gone, holy shit, that's really clever. You might have gone, wait, well, why does she think, wait, that doesn't make sense. Why is that a thing? And then you might need the explanation. So that's a thing of writing to your audience, and the audience might not necessarily be 29-year-old man who probably should have better things to do with his life. The audience might be 15, 16, 17-year-old kid who's interested in the story behind the game, and in that sense, not being too clever for your own writing is sometimes a good idea. So yeah, take that piece of criticism with a little grain of salt, but the point I'm trying to get at is write to your audience, and in this case, this was not really written to me as an audience, but it might have been written to someone else, to their level. What else do we have? Right, there's a fantastic thing at the end. Riven confesses to the crime. Sorry for the spoilers. That's a really good, strong point to end on, because it's not a cliffhanger, but it's a cliffhanger, in the sense that this is, okay, we have now had confirmation that Riven is the one who killed Yasuo's master. That's kind of a big deal for the lore of the game, and for the lore between these two characters, that Yasuo was falsely accused of a crime that Riven committed, and has spent his entire life on the run and had to murder his brother for her crimes. That, wow, that's a big deal. But, like, in terms of the story contained within itself, this is not a cliffhanger. This is not... This is what happens right before the cliffhanger. The cliffhanger would be the judge saying, so I sentence you to death. Bam! That would be the cliffhanger, because holy shit, is she gonna be killed? But right here, it's just, she's just confessed, but nothing else has really happened. So, yeah, there's a little bit of stuff going on with Riven kind of struggling with her post-traumatic stress disorder, essentially. She has repressed a hell of a lot of memories, so she doesn't remember the answers to most of the questions that she's being asked. at the trial because she doesn't want to remember. It's traumatic for her. And the blade itself is an emblem of that trauma. It is shattered, and that blade being shattered is a metaphor for Riven herself being shattered. So when the blade is put back together at the trial, Riven is forced to remember some of the memories that she has been so hard at work trying to repress. That is really fucking clever. Like, that's a really good use of a visual metaphor. The blade is a metaphor for Riven. Once it's put back together, whether she likes it or not, she's gonna get hurt. It's also a nice little detail that when the weapon is put back together, it explodes with energy and knocks everyone down, like a burst of runic energy. Again, as a visual metaphor for the trauma that Riven is about to go through because she's being forced to relive, like, the horror of the attack she participated in on Ionia, where people were murdered by chemical weapons. Like, those are really, really good metaphors. I really like that. And I would have liked it even more if we had had an extended scene in the cell where she was sleeping at the start, sort of going into how hard she's working to repress those memories, to hold them down, to try and not remember. Like, if that had happened immediately before the trial and kind of been the setup for this to pay off on, that, to me, that would have been a really strong way of writing it. Whereas here, for me, there was some work being done to set this up. We kind of got implications of Riven struggling with her memories in the previous chapter of the story, but at this point it feels very distant. Like, a whole lot of stuff has happened in between there, and to me, the paying off on that now feels like, in terms of rhythm, it feels a little bit too late. Whereas if we had known, like, at the start of the trial, because she thinks she's going to die, she thinks they're going to sentence her to death, she's struggling to hold, like, to keep a lid on her post-traumatic stress disorder. Like, she's struggling to keep a lid on her trauma because she's terrified. She thinks she's going to die. She wants to return to violence as a fight and flight mechanic kicks in, and she can't run away, so she can only fight. But on the other hand, she's desperate not to return to violence, because returning to violence means returning to those memories that she doesn't want to have anymore. And the sword, again, works as a really great metaphor for that. She's traumatized by the sword being broken, but she also doesn't want to pick up the sword again because it's a deadly thing that murders people, and she doesn't want that for herself anymore, right? And I would really have liked it if that had been set up at the start by showing us her state of mind before the trial, by diving into what it feels like for her to be taken away from her work and from her new surrogate family, put in a hostile environment with no escape and no one to turn to but herself and her own thoughts. Like that, I'm a little annoyed that opportunity was kind of passed by. Anyway, I think that's about, like, this is like half an hour of me criticizing a 14-minute chapter of a story, and that must probably be enough. Once again, I really like this. I would not spend this much time on it if I didn't have strong feelings about it, and I wouldn't have strong feelings about it if it wasn't interesting in some way. And this really is interesting. This really is good. I want Riot to do more of this. Much, much, much more of this. For more characters. I want all of the characters to have stories like these. Little self-contained things that develop their characters and their relationships. Yes! Please, more of this. I liked this a lot. I think it does a lot of clever things. I have 100 million nitpicks because I always do, but this is really good. So, if you have any comments, you should feel extremely free to leave them down below. If you have any requests for video topics that you'd like to see me cover in the future, those also go in the comments. There's a like button down there who just loves being clicked on. It's just his favorite thing in the world, just to feel the soft touch of a mouse button going click. And the dislike button next to him is kind of a jackass, so we don't touch him. We don't want to deal with. He's just like, whenever you click on him, he goes like, and it's just uncomfortable for everyone. So don't click on him unless you absolutely have to. There's a subscribe button you can click on too, if you wanna. I have a channel, you can subscribe to it. There are some supporters I have on Patreon. They've been scrolling by over there for a little while. If you want to support me there, there's a link. It's gonna be coming up on the screen shortly, and it's also gonna be down in the description. I'd be very grateful. I'm working on getting some rewards up there that are relevant to the YouTube crowd, but for the time being, I'm just going to say many, many thanks to the people who are supporting me. My name has been TVSkyn. Thank you very much for watching, and have a wonderful day.